5 of VBS. I can't believe we have completed a whole week. I'm sure you guys are having a great time. So let's not waste any more time and get right into our story session with Pastor Jerry.
Hey champ, day 5. Fist bump. Come on, fist bump with Pastor Jerry. There you go. Every single one of you. Day 5, can you imagine? We are moving fast. We've come to the end of 1 week, and I'm so glad we've made big progress through the Bible. In fact, today we might even finish 1 book of the Bible and move into the next one. Are you ready? Ready for story time? All right. Big eyes, big ears, hearts beating hard. Listen to Pastor Jerry as I tell you the story. You know I love you, right? That's why I'm talking to you, right? And God loves you. And everything we say because God has a plan for you and for me and for our lives. In this lesson, you're going to be learning about Moses and the nation of Israel. Everybody say Moses. Again, come on, say Moses. Not your cousin Moses. This is the guy in the Bible, Moses, okay? Last time I told you about a guy called Jacob, and he had 12 sons because he had 2 wives and 12 sons, and each of those sons were special because they would become the heads of the tribes of the nation of Israel. Jacob was wrestled by God to the ground, and as he submitted to God, God changed his name to Israel. Jacob means deceiver. Israel means one who is known by God, and God was going to make a great nation and fulfill his promise to Abraham. And the 3 big names we remembered was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who became Israel. These are the 3 major names, the major families, and then through them, the son would come. The son who was the snake crusher. Ready? All right, so we're moving from the book of Genesis to the next book called Exodus. Exodus means the book of departure or the story of departure. This is when the people of Israel began to move, or they began to move out of Egypt. If you remember last time, they had gone to Egypt because they needed food, and their brother had become the prime minister. They got food, they settled, they got land, they got playing parks, and they've got all sorts of beautiful places to stay and to have fun and to ride, and they loved their life, and they grew and they had children, and Pharaoh was very happy with them. Everybody was happy with them. But what happened is, and you'll find this in Exodus chapter 1 verse 7 onwards. Can I read it for you? Jacob and his sons, 70 in all, they had moved and settled. But what it says here is the children of Israel, that is the children of Jacob, were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. That means they had children and children's children, and everywhere you would see the Israelites. And the family of Israel soon became the nation of Israel, because that's what so many people. From a family of 70 people, they became millions of people, and they filled the land, and now a foreign land had become their own land in the land of Egypt. So a place that was a place of rescue, where they found food and a new place away from the famine, now became a place which was eventually a captivity, like a prison. You say, Pastor Jerry, how did that happen? How can a beautiful place become a terrible place? Well, what happened was, from 70 they went to millions, and because they were doing so well, the new Pharaoh, the next Pharaoh who came, he didn't know them. He didn't know that they were special people of God. He didn't know Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. He didn't know that. All he knew was, where did these guys come from? They're taking all our homes and our parks, and they're taking all our toys, and they're taking all our food, and they're becoming so good at everything that our people are losing all their jobs, and we are becoming small and they are becoming big. We don't like it. We don't like it. Who are all these foreigners becoming big in our land? And they began to get angry and jealous and racist. And then what happened is they started suppressing them and treating them badly and harshly. The Bible says Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born of these people should be thrown into the river. Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every Israelite child that is born, throw them in the river. So the next generation would not come about, especially every baby boy, because a son was supposed to come who was going to crush the snake. And Satan didn't like that plan. Satan knew the plan from the beginning. He was there in the Garden of Eden, and he knows the son is coming. And he's trying every generation to stop the son. But at that point, he didn't know who the son was. Was it going to be Isaac? Was it going to be Jacob? Was it going to be Moses? Who's it going to be? Maybe it's Moses. So if we kill this generation, then even Moses would go. But you think God was smarter than that? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So this is what happened. Let me tell you the story. At that time, an Israelite couple had a little baby boy. And you know that the Pharaoh has told all the babies to be thrown into the river, right? He didn't want any of the next generation coming. So first they hid the baby for 3 months. And then they couldn't hide the baby any longer. So what the mother did was she made a basket. And she sealed the basket so the basket doesn't drown in the river. And she put the baby in the basket. So technically she put them in the river because that's what Pharaoh wanted. But as he was put into the basket and put into the river, the basket floated across the river and went over to the other side. And you know who was at the other side? The princess from Pharaoh's palace. And she picked up the basket, and as soon as she was wondering what's in the basket, was it fruits? Was it fish? What's in the basket? And when she opened the basket, a baby, the most beautiful baby boy was in the basket. And she's like, oh, this is amazing. And she took that baby and she made it her own baby. And she gave him the name Moses. You said Moses? Moses. She gave him the name Moses. So she decided to adopt this baby and make it her own. So Moses, who was born out of slavery, Moses, who was part of the nation of Israel, landed up in a palace as a baby, and he grew with all the lush toys and beautiful food and the wonderful surroundings of a palace. 40 years he lived and grew in that place. They trained him, they educated him, he went to the best schools, he played on the best rides, he got the best food and all the treats that everybody who was in Pharaoh's court got. God's plans are always amazing, and God put Moses there. But you know, every time God picks a person and every time God blesses a person, it's always for a purpose. It's always for a bigger reason. It's always for a reason bigger than Moses himself. And God will use you. One day, you're going to be used by God for many people, and God's going to talk to you and call you and make you take big steps of faith. And he's going to prove that he is the same God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now Moses. And that God is your God. He's the big God. So Moses grew in the palace and he learned everything about the palace. But you know what? One more thing he learned. He learned that he was not an Egyptian. Yeah. He learned that actually he was an Israelite. So one day he went over to the window and he moved the curtain aside and he looked out from the palace down onto the people, and he saw that all the Egyptians were masters and all of his people were slaves. They were slaves. They were being beaten by whips and they were being made to work. And he said, those are my people. Those are my people. There's two people you need to recognize in your life. Who is your God and who are your people? And Moses was learning that the God of Israel, the God of Jacob, the God of Abraham was his God. And the people out there were his people. And they were enslaved by the Egyptians. and they were killing their babies, and they were treating them like slaves. You know, God heard the cries of the slaves, and God heard the cries of the babies. And he was preparing Moses in the palace to deliver them. Say the word deliver. Deliver them. See, God always hears prayers. And sometimes we feel that God's not answering my prayer. God's not answering my prayer. But God listens and God hears. And God was preparing a deliverer, a son. A son would be a deliverer. A son would come, and a son would be the answer to the problems of God's people. One day, Moses was carrying all of these things in his heart, and he knew who he was. And he did a very bad thing. One day he saw that one of his people was being treated badly, and then somebody took his life. And he bashed up that guy. And as soon as he bashed up that guy, he was in trouble. So he ran away. He spent many years in the desert, far, far away. And he became a shepherd. You know what a shepherd does? He looks after sheep. God always teaches his leaders to look after his people. And from a baby almost killed, he was raised in a palace. And he became a prince. And then he became a shepherd. What a life. What an incredible life. So for 40 years he was in the palace. And then for 40 years he was in the wilderness. And for 80 years of his life, God was preparing him. He went from a prince to a fugitive to a shepherd, from a shepherd to God's son deliverer. One day, Moses took his sheep out to graze. That means he took them out to eat grass. It was a mountain called Horeb. And you will not believe what happened to him. The strangest thing happened to Moses. Moses was just standing around and he was just thinking and looking at the sky and wondering if it's going to be late, and all of his sheep were just jump, 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 jump. And suddenly, as he looked at everything that seemed familiar, he saw something that was not familiar. He looked at one particular bush, and that bush seemed to be on fire. He said, "That's odd." And as he got closer, he saw that the bush was on fire, but it wasn't on fire. I mean, it looked like it was on fire, but the bush was not burning up. And he got closer, and as he got closer, he heard a voice. And the voice said, "Moses." I'm like, "Who's that?" And he came closer, and the voice said, "Moses." And he got scared, and he said, "Who's that? Who's that?" He said, and it was God. God was going to meet Moses and tell him his plan, just like he told Abraham, just like he told Jacob. God was going to tell him his plan. God, when he gets close to people, he always tells people his plan. He has called us friends, not enemies. And when he tells us his plan, he wants us to be part of his plan. So Moses was about to hear the plan. And Moses gets closer, and God says, "Listen, Moses, I'm holy. You are on holy ground. Take your shoes off. Take your shoes off." So Moses took his sandals off. It was a Velcro sort of sandal, the one that you get in Sarojini Nagar. So he took that his sandals off, and he stepped on to holy ground. He was in the presence of God. And as he got close, he fell on the ground and he worshipped God. And you know what God said to him? God introduced himself to Moses because they were meeting for the first time. And he introduced, and you know what he called himself? God. You know what he called himself? God says, "I am the God of your fathers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob." He's like, "Oh yeah, I know that." See, that's why it's very important for mums and dads to tell their children about the God they worship. For mums and dads to tell generation after generation about the coming son. It's very important. So you should tell your mom and dad, "You should tell me the stories. Read to me the stories. Read to me Genesis and Exodus and the Gospels. Tell me the stories, mom and dad. It's your job to tell me." Okay, today you tell your mom and dad that. Tell them that they're responsible to tell you the big stories about their God. So God introduces himself to Moses and says, "Moses, I've always known you. In fact, I know your father, I know your grandfather, I know your great-grandfather. And I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's fantastic. Moses said to God, God, if you are their God, then you are also my God. Sir, yes, sir, what would you have me do? And then God sat down, in a sense, and he began to tell Moses the story. He said, Moses, I've been watching my people. You've been watching your people. And you know what? I've heard their cry. And they are in pain. And their babies are being killed. And they don't have enough food. And they've been treated like slaves, where once upon a time they were guests. And I've heard their cry. And Moses, I want to deliver them. I want to get them out of here. In fact, I want to get them to a place where it's beautiful. A land flowing with milk and honey. Milk and honey? That sounds sticky. No, what God meant was everything was overflowing. There was much of everything. There was enough to drink, enough to eat, enough sweets, enough food. And God was going to take his people to the promised land. Moses, you are going to help me lead them to the promised land. Moses got afraid. He says, me? I'm not a leader. In fact, I ran away. Why would they listen to me? I'm not a leader. And he got really worried. And Moses was making all kinds of excuses. You know how like when you make excuses when mom asks you to do something in the house? You know? When you want to watch TV, but mom asks you to do something in the house, or your dad asks you to study. You know how you make excuses? Moses was like that. No, God, I don't want to do. I don't want. And he was making all sorts of excuses. But God was going to get his man to do his job. So God promised many miraculous signs saying, Moses, I'm going to prove myself to you. You get out there and you make it happen. I will help people believe that you are sent by me. You tell them, I am who has sent you. I am who I am. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has sent you. So Moses pulled his guts together and he got ready to go to Pharaoh to tell him. Moses had gone to Pharaoh and said, I want you to let my people go, because we are a free people and God wants us to go to another place and worship him there. And then the whole negotiation started. I want to go, let them go. I want to go, let them go. I want to go, let them go. And just as we had imagined, Pharaoh said, I'm not going to let you go. You are good slaves. We need you. Who's going to water our plants? Who's going to build our houses? We need you. We need you to be slaves here. But God's people were God's people and they belonged with God in God's promised land. And you are God's chosen children. And God has a plan for you as well. Sometimes we go through difficult times and sometimes we find ourselves in places where we don't like it. But when we cry out to God, God hears our prayer and he answers and he sends a deliverer. Always he sends a deliverer. Let me stop there because there's more coming. And with every generation, we're getting closer and closer and closer to the Son, the snake crusher, the one who will eventually take away the curse, bring the blessing, and restore the Eden to us. Restore God's blessing to us. Are you ready for that? It's coming. And we've completed a week. I hope you'll go over the stories and I hope you let us know what you thought. Okay? Thank you so much for being with us. Fist bump, one last time. Have a great week over the weekend. See you Monday morning. Bye.
That was day 5 and we have learned 5 amazing stories so far. Isn't that great? Well, now it's time to go and join your group captains in your group meetings. And don't forget, the next time we meet is on Monday. So have a great weekend.